Last weekend, the International Association of Free Thought Congress took place in Paris, and one of the speakers was Michael Nugent, who is the chairperson for Atheist Ireland. And one of the issues that Michael discussed in his address to the Congress was the right to die debate. And after watching his own wife pass away from a terminal illness, Michael has been an advocate for the right to die, saying that he thinks this is one of the most important rights in an ethical society. And Michael is with me now live in studio to talk to me about this. Michael, thanks for coming in.
Good afternoon.
Can you, I suppose, lay out your stall a little bit and tell me, and obviously you have your own personal experience of this, which I'm very sorry to hear, but also you have, you know, an ethical position on this. What's your position on the notion of the right to die?
Well, different people who are dying will have different ideas themselves about how they want to die. And if somebody wants to stay alive as long as possible, they should have the best possible medical resources to enable them to do that. Nobody should be forced to die earlier than they want to. And equally, if somebody, for their own reasons, if they're of sound mind and they're terminally ill and they want to die peacefully, reliably and at a time of their choosing, in order to avoid unnecessary suffering, they should have that right. And neither right cancels out the other. They're both equally important.
Yeah, and I look, I have slightly softened my position on this over the years, because I have always been against the right to die, because my fear has been that the right to die can become, for people maybe wanting to protect their loved ones, maybe not wanting to be a burden to people and all that, the right to die can become the duty to die. And I think that's the concern that most people who are not in favour of the right to die express, that express that there's a pressure on the person maybe who's sick to shuffle off sooner than they should, so they don't. So it's not about their suffering; it's about their relative suffering. Is that not of concern to you?
Well, it doesn't seem to be the case in reality. I mean, there are places where the right to die has been around for several decades, like Oregon, where the statistics show that there hasn't been any increase in dying of that level that people would be concerned about vulnerable groups. There is the fact that in any case, it's not about the act of dying. It's about the peace of mind that you have while you are still alive. When Anne, my wife, made preparations to die, if she needed to, in order to avoid unnecessary suffering, her quality of life absolutely soared after that. And for the remaining year of her life, she was able to enjoy that year in a way that she wouldn't have if she didn't have that option available. And most people who make those preparations, and I don't mean even just take the decision, but I mean who either obtain the substances needed to do it or make a booking in Dignitas in Switzerland or whatever, most people who make those preparations actually die naturally.
So, and I don't want to personalise it too much, but I think it's an important point because you're somebody who's experienced this. So your late wife, she had a decision made in her head that should her suffering become unbearable in some way, that she was going to take action. And that gave, are you saying that in itself gave her a relief?
Absolutely.
That security, if you like, that was there for her.
It is. It's almost like, to use an analogy, it's almost like an insurance policy. You know, she knew that if it came to it and if it became unbearable, that she wouldn't have to go through the unnecessary suffering. And knowing that probably staved off the suffering in many ways.
I completely hear what you're saying, and I do, and I know of a family myself who have a child who's suffering a lot with an illness that's very painful and may well end up not surviving it and all that kind of stuff. And I can see the point, because they have said, you know, in front of me, you wouldn't let a dog go through this, and I get it entirely, I do. But I suppose some of the concerns are around the fact that hard cases make hard laws, or bad laws maybe, and bringing something like this in for the few people who might want to take it up can have a detrimental effect on the many. There have been studies, and I've talked to you about this before, Michael, so I thought I'd better get my studies right. There's been studies of for example, assisted dying in the Netherlands, where they anonymised the physicians, and in order to, they do have assisted dying in the Netherlands, but it's supposed to only take place provided that somebody who is competent and has an unrelievable suffering makes a voluntary request to a physician. So they're the criteria. And then that physician, having this patient come to them with the request, has to talk to another physician, and then they have to make a decision. And so it's supposed to have these safeguards. But they've studied this, and this guy, Dr. Hendon from the States, has studied a lot of cases over there. And they did big studies, and they were anonymised so that the doctors who answered the studies, one, nobody knew who they were, and two, is they were guaranteed immunity from any prosecution. And some of the stuff was pretty poor. Like, One physician said he had a nun who was very unwell, and he felt her religion was preventing her from agreeing to euthanasia. So he felt justified and compassionate in ending her life without telling her he was doing so. Another one, a wife offered a husband a choice between a care home or euthanasia because she said she couldn't care for him anymore, and he opted to do it because of the fear of going into a care home. Another one, there was a mother of a boy who had died and was very depressed and requested assisted dying for her depression. A psychiatrist granted it within 4 months, which is a very short space of time. And I think it's very probably the case that over time that woman may have come back and not wanted to die because she was in the aftermath of grief. And then there's lots of stuff just about physicians here saying, I ended the life of a patient with breast cancer because it could have taken a week before she died and I needed a bed. And also about the fact that instead of it being a competent patient volunteering the request to you, lots and lots and lots of cases, up to a third of physicians saying they were offering it before they were asked about it. Now, those are the worries, because what it says in that study, and there was 3 studies, there was one in 1990, 1995 and 2001, all done on the Dutch system. They say that the safeguards that you want to have in place, which sound very reasonable, a competent patient, unrelievable suffering and a voluntary request, that they're almost unenforceable, and in practice those criteria are not adhered to. Is that not of genuinely significant worry if we were to bring something like that in?
Well, I mean, of course it is, but it's an argument for ensuring that the safeguards are properly policed. It's not an argument for making people who are suffering go through that suffering unnecessarily. And the other point there is that in many ways it's like similar to the abortion debate, in that it's going to happen anyway. People who are terminally ill will make their own decisions about ending their own lives, and they're not going to make their decisions based on what the courts say. They're going to act on their own moral compass and their own compassion. And what's happening is that compassion and love are being frustrated by laws that don't take the humanity into account. So it's going to happen anyway. If it is legalised, there is more chance that people can discuss it openly with people without unnecessary pressure, without feeling that they're acting illegally, and so they might end up getting unreliable information. So I agree with you completely. The safeguards need to be there.
They do.
But that is an argument for trying to figure out how best to implement the safeguards. It's not an argument for not having the right to assisted dying.
But Michael, what if it is the case that it's almost impossible to have proper safeguards? Because a lot of that study would suggest that euthanasia or assisted dying or any of those, whatever you'd like to call it, that it's been put out there as an option for people rather than it be something that people are looking for themselves. And then that does become an issue for people, because if it is a suggestion that you might shuffle off a week sooner because there's a pressure on beds, and God knows we have a pressure on beds in this country, and I'd have a significant worry about that, or if it is a case that we are suggesting to people that this is an option because sure, why wouldn't it be, and all that kind of stuff, the chances are, yes, people will take it up, and some of them may be people who could have actually maybe been made comfortable and not died sooner than they were going to die naturally and still been comfortable, but due to fear or due to a sense of responsibility or due to a sense of trying to protect families. Do you see that there is a possibility that in order to offer that as a solution to a small number of people who genuinely feel that that's what they want and that they have a right to it, that we run a risk of, I don't want to be catastrophic, so I'm not going to say something stupid like a floodgate, but that we run a risk of other people's lives being ended sooner because we've now skewed the system to make this a more acceptable end to people's lives?
Well, if you take your first point, if there's a lack of hospital beds, then that should be addressed by more investment in healthcare, regardless of whether or not people are.
I won't argue with that. You're dead right.
So I'm completely supportive of people having the right to the best possible medical care, regardless of whether or not they're dying. But in terms of people having the availability of people to even discuss it with if it's legal. At the moment it's happening anyway, but people may not have reliable information. It's like if you take the similar arguments were made about about suicide when suicide was legalised. Or decriminalised.
Yeah.
And one of the strong arguments for that is that if it is legalised, then people will be able to discuss it more openly, people will get more reliable information, and you will have less chance of the worst case outcome, which is somebody trying to take their life, failing and ending up alive with brain damage. So overall, in terms of a combination of individual human rights and I think the balance of compassion and empathy and reciprocity and fairness and justice, I think that the right to choose assisted dying combined with strong safeguards is the best for individuals and for society.
I can see how it might be the best for certain individuals, but I still have some ethical concerns. Another ethical concern, of course, is around who is going to assist people in their dying, because for a lot of physicians, presumably that would be quite the ask, to sort of move from the main pillar or tenet of medicine is to do no harm, but to move from that to actually accelerating or speeding up the death of a patient is for a lot of people an abhorrent idea, I suppose, and a very difficult one. Now, I can see what you're arguing on the grounds of compassion, I can, but you mentioned suicide there. And the reality of it is most people can probably, not everybody, but most people could probably end their lives by suicide themselves should they want to. And we're in very careful territory here because, I know this is a very sensitive subject. But to move it from that to assisted suicide is quite a step.
Well, Mary Fleming took a court case about that because she was in a position where she wouldn't have been able to take her own life if she wanted to. And the case that she took to the courts was that suicide is legal, but that she was being discriminated against on the grounds of her disability because she wouldn't be able to exercise that right without assistance. Now, the courts found in that case, what everybody knows is they found that there isn't a constitutional right to either suicide or assisted dying. Yep. But what they also said, and the government and Parliament have completely ignored this, is that they said that the Parliament does have the right to enshrine that right by law as long as it puts in place sufficient safeguards. And it was the courts, as is typical in Ireland, were more or less telling the government to do that, and were saying that in the particular case of Mary, they assumed that the DPP would look compassionately on anything that took place in that case.
I know, and I, do you know what? It's not an argument for winning and losing a debate. I think it actually has to have a lot of sensitivity around it, and lots of people are getting involved with this, Michael. Many people would be fully in agreement with you. We all have the right to live, but no right to be allowed to die. Why? You would never allow an animal to suffer, yet you would allow a fellow human being to suffer. Hypocrites, and I think that's quite a common thread here. And another one here from Paul in Kilcool. As a Catholic, I believe God is the only one who can decide when we die. However, not everyone believes anymore, so if you want to arrange your own death, well, so be it, but strict protocols will have to be brought in so relatives can't decide they want the inheritance quicker. And I think that's a very good point too. There shouldn't be any win for people left behind. That has to be decoupled. Another one here says human beings should have the right to die and the right to live. Too often death is at the discretion of a medical person. The DNR order, and the DNR is the do not resuscitate order, or the withdrawal of IV fluids or the active treatment. These decisions are nearly often made without the consent or the involvement of the person, and this is so wrong. A doctor or a nurse should not have the right to decide when I die. Who gave them that right? And last one I'll say on this one is if I want to go to my lawyer and put it in my will that if I'm suffering too much and I want to die, surely it is my right. And that's from Ger. Currently isn't Ger, but that's the way it is. Look, my sincere thanks to Michael Nugent. I think it is a very, Michael Nugent, of course, of Atheist Ireland, but I think it is a very significant debate that we need to be having, and I think we will presumably hear more of this again. So thank you for that, and do let us know what you think as well. 53106. Coming up after this.